All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Unapologetic Apologists. I have here with me Kyle Alander from Christian Idealism and TJump from TJump. So both of their YouTube channels are in the description. So go there, subscribe, help support them. First, Tom and Kyle, thank you so much for being here, guys.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. So yeah, me and Tom, you and I were talking about setting something up, and then Kyle mentioned to me about having a conversation with you. So I was like, okay, this will be good. And especially for me, because, obviously my bias, I'm a Christian, but I wouldn't say exactly in the middle, but somewhere, I guess, between you guys, because I know Kyle is an idealist, which I am not. So this will be kind of fun for me, kind of sit back watching you guys, depending on where it goes. I'm interested to learn, I'm sure the audience is. So I guess since Kyle, people always talk about taking the affirmative. Obviously, we're not structuring this in open, statements or anything, but I guess, Kyle, yep. I'll kick it to you to kick off.
All right. So my position is basically idealism. Now, there's a lot of misunderstanding. I don't hold to Berkeley's idealism like, most contemporary philosophers that are idealists would affirm his version of idealism. I don't affirm that version. I affirm what's called objective idealism. So it would actually fall more in line with other philosophers' view of it, which is basically that all that exists is universal consciousness. The whole universe is within this, universal consciousness or a mind. And then, the world that we experience is kind of like the dream of that universal consciousness. And then we, as individual consciousnesses, are what's called disassociated alters of that, larger conscious system, or whatever you want to call it. And so this wouldn't really work with some of the stuff that TJump talks about, which is naturalistic pantheism. It wouldn't really, because the fundamental thing in this hypothesis, or whatever you want to call it, is that consciousness is fundamental to reality. So you can't reduce the qualities of experience to something that's not the qualities of experience. It's basically in and of itself just fundamental. And from that, you get all physical matter like particles, atoms, stuff like that. So, we can discuss more about that, but that's my position, is that we each of us have our own mental lives. The reason that we cannot access other people's mental lives is because we are disassociated alters. We are disassociated from other people. And that the world, there is an objective world that exists beyond my mind. So it's not just all my mind, right? There's a reality that exists beyond not just my mind, but your mind, everybody. There's a world that exists beyond everybody's mind. In other words, there's an objective reality that exists outside of perception. But that reality that exists outside of perception is itself mental in nature. And I also have my own interpretation of quantum mechanics, which we can also discuss, which is a little different than what inspired philosophy kind of proposes. So maybe me and TJump can kind of agree to some concepts, some ideas, but yeah, that's pretty much my position. And again, we can discuss more of the details, but yeah.
So, Tom, did you have any comments or anything on that?
I usually just go with the consensus in philosophy on idealism. It's just an ad hoc addition of new stuff that we don't need. It makes it less simple, it doesn't really do anything or accomplish anything, which is why the vast majority of philosophers just reject it wholesale. It's pretty much just adding in a new property to everything that we don't really need.
So, okay, so I'm going to make a comment, and then maybe you guys can go off of this, because, as someone who doesn't accept it, but it also doesn't fully understand it, I am not super educated on it. So Tom's concern seems to be that it's kind of this ad hoc addition of maybe consciousness into things. I have heard it said, not by you, Kyle, but by different idealists, that to not accept idealism, because the idealism that some people I've heard to subscribe to is something that everything is information. And so to say that there's a material beyond information on their perspective is an ad hoc addition of kind of this material world, when all we need is the information, because but maybe I'm mistaken there.
Well, it depends, because I'm starting with consciousness in and of itself. So what does that mean? Well, basically means I basically take all my beliefs and I reduce, what can I know for certainty, or what can I know what is most likely the case? And what is most likely the case, what is the most parsimonious, is that from the starting point, I know that I have experiences. I know that there are these mental states that I have. I know that my perceptions are also mental in nature, right? Like the color red, for example, like my room's mostly red. That itself that's not a physical property in the sense of it doesn't exist beyond my perception of it. It only exists in the sense that I perceive it. And if I'm not perceiving the color red, then the color red doesn't really exist, So I don't really see how it's adding on anything. It's just taking the fundamental thing, which we can know of, which is consciousness, and then applying the ontology of consciousness to all of reality. So I'm using consciousness, again, not my personal consciousness, but just consciousness as its own ontology, and then applying that to the entire universe or reality, and then using that framework to explain reality itself. So I'm not adding anything.
Well, it's the same as solipsism. You're saying I exist. Let's just apply that to all reality. I'm the only thing that exists. It's the same kind of methodology that solipsism uses.
I disagree.
Literally everything you just said is literally what solipsism does. It says we take the first thing we can know is that I exist, and then we apply that ontology to everything in the universe. I'm the only thing.
Except I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying that it's me that exists. What I'm saying is I know.
I'm not saying that you're a solipsist. I'm not saying you're a solipsist. I'm saying solipsists do the same thing you're doing. So when you're applying the ontology of consciousness to everything, that's the exact same thing a solipsist is doing when saying they're applying the ontology of their existence to everything, because that's all they experience. If you take your independent, the first thing you experience, and then just apply that to everything, that's obviously going to fail. The fact that it's simple doesn't mean anything. Yes, it's simple, and it's just simpler to say we're all solipsism. Solipsism is the only thing. It's also simpler, but it doesn't make it true. Simplicity is not a measure of truth. It's just a measure of usefulness. So that doesn't help you at all. You're just doing the same thing the solipsist is doing and saying, well, the first thing we experience is consciousness. Let's just apply that to everything because that makes sense. Well, no, it doesn't actually. The reason we don't do that is because it accomplishes nothing. The first thing you have to do with evidence is demonstrate is something real or is something imaginary. So is this idea that you've come up with, is consciousness a thing in the universe in and of itself, or is that an imaginary construct you've made up? So you need to demonstrate that it actually applies to things in the world, not just our imagination, which is why we go with science. Science can do this. So if we list all the properties of an electron, spin, mass, charm, whatever, none of them have consciousness. So you're adding in, you're saying, well, this particle has consciousness, is in it somewhere, but we don't see it anywhere. We can demonstrate spin and mass and energy and speed, to steal Cam's argument. But you're adding in this new property saying consciousness also is in this thing. It's never been demonstrated in this thing ever, but you're going to add it in because you want to, think that your experience of consciousness applies to everything.
I want to make my position clear. So I'm not a panpsychist that's going to say that everything has consciousness. Like I don't say that, particles or fields have consciousness, right? What I say is that the whole universe is within consciousness. Okay. So there's a clear distinction there. I'm not saying that consciousness is within particles themselves. What I'm saying is that the particles themselves are within consciousness or within this larger conscious system. So, I just want to make my point clear that I don't affirm, panpsychism in that sense. As far as your comments about solipsism, I would agree with you that we can infer that there is an objective reality. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so if there's an objective reality, then obviously right off the bat, that's not compatible with solipsism, because if there's an objective reality, well, that would mean that there's something outside of my mind.
That wasn't the point. So whether or not I agree there's an objective reality doesn't matter to the point. So the point is that what you're doing is you see something and you apply that something to everything in the universe. You say, here's the first thing we experience. We're going to apply that to everything. That's the exact same thing the solipsist does. What they're applying may be different. Their self-existence as opposed to the consciousness that you are, but the methodology is the same. The methodology fails in both cases for the same reason.
No, because because the solipsists, what they're doing is they're taking their experiences and saying that it applies to all reality. I'm not saying that my experiences applies to all reality. What I'm saying is that consciousness as its own ontology, okay, regardless of whether or not it's subjective or objective to us, is all that exists in reality.
That's special pleading. You're just saying, well, what they're doing it wrong and we're doing it right. You're still doing the same thing. The thing you are doing is you see something. Initially, you say this is the first thing we can know, and then you apply that thing to everything. That doesn't work. It's a composition division fallacy. You cannot do that. They do it
Why
for
not?
themselves. You do it for it's a composition
Yeah,
division.
but I'm not doing it in the same way that they're doing it.
No, you're doing it in the exact same way they're doing it. You're just doing it for a different thing. It's a composition division fallacy. You're saying, here's the first thing we experience. We're going to apply this to everything.
No, but
So,
what I'm saying is that consciousness is both subjective and objective in that sense. Where yes, each of us has our own subjective awareness of consciousness, but then there's still an objective awareness of consciousness that we may not necessarily have access to because we're disassociated from that larger conscious system. Now, of course, we can still.
That's adding in something that we have no basis for. So we have no evidence of that thing at all. We have evidence of our existence, of our consciousness. We don't have evidence of this objective consciousness thing that's independent of us.
Well, I mean, that's like saying that we can perceive that the Earth, like the horizon of the Earth, like we perceive that it seems like the Earth, like is a globe Earth, right? And then you say, oh well, I'm going to posit this new ontology that's outside of that. That's like saying, oh well, there's this other Earth that we don't have direct access to, but somehow it exists that's ontologically distinct from the Earth that I perceive. And that's I think where the physicalist error.
I have no idea what you're saying right there. So again, your argument is that we have consciousness and that this consciousness applies to things that aren't us. So you've added in this new thing. There's this new consciousness that isn't us, that also exists, that isn't what we're experiencing. So in science, we don't do that. Physicalism works just fine. We just say there's physical interactions that we can demonstrate, and those are the things that exist because we can demonstrate them. I don't see your comparison to idealism at all here. Like so again, it seems like you're adding in this new thing that has no basis. This is other consciousness.
So I want to make the point clear that idealism does acknowledge that there is a world outside of personal psyches. In other words, there's a world that exists outside of our minds. Okay, so I'm not saying that it's only our minds that exist because that would imply solipsism. Okay,
I never said that either.
Okay, so but you seem to bring up what's called the equivalence objection, and Bernardo Kastrup actually brings this up in his book. And the basic argument is that that if we're like, for example, he says that any viable ontology must entail at least one inference beyond direct experience. That is necessarily to make sense of the fact that we all inhabit the same world beyond ourselves and are unable to change its governing laws. For this reason, physicalism affirms the existence of a universe outside consciousness that we all inhabit. Idealism, on the other hand, infers simply that consciousness itself extends beyond its face value personal boundaries. This way, while physicalism postulates a fundamentally new ontological class next to experience, idealism simply extrapolates the boundaries of consciousness, the sole undeniable ontological class, beyond those that we can probe directly. And so, he goes into it how, to put it metaphorically, while idealism makes sense of reality by inferring that the Earth extends beyond the visible horizon, physicalism does so by inferring the existence of an isomorphic but ontologically distinct shadow Earth. Clearly, the former is not parsimonious. The former is more parsimonious. It is not equivalent to the latter.
So again, the same thing.
Kind of what you're doing where...
Well, no, that argument objectively fails. Like, we know that's wrong because it presumes that consciousness is an ontology unto itself. That's just immediately false. You can't just assume that just because we experience it. We know it's a thing. We don't know if it's a thing unto itself. So it could be a composite or anything.
Okay, so would you disagree with the fact that consciousness is irreducible to itself?
Yes, obviously.
Okay, well then we can start discussing that. Because I guess that
everyone in neurology, psychology, biology, I
don't care about appeal to authority. I care about the evidence. So
yeah, all of the people who understand the evidence say that it's wrong.
Okay, but can you explain why it's wrong?
Yeah, because the evidence shows that we are material things.
Okay, so can you give me a scientific paper that explains how the brain produces consciousness?
Nope, we don't know that yet.
Okay, then so you can't say that.
Can you give me a way of how idealism explains consciousness? Give me a scientific paper of idealists explaining consciousness scientifically. Go.
Well, it depends. I mean,
no, the answer is no. You can't, because there aren't any. We haven't solved this problem. Idealists like to make up that they have a solution here, but they haven't. They're just labeling something we don't understand as an argument from ignorance, saying, we can't explain it, therefore it's fundamental. Like, that's not an argument. Like, all of the evidence we have is that consciousness can be interfered with by physical processes, not the other way around. I can't levitate something using the force with my brain. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, that's a straw man in my position. I specifically said that we're disassociated from the world, so of course we can't control it, right? Because if we're disassociated from it, if we're mentally, there's a mental barrier between myself and controlling.
Right. So you have to come up with all these ad hoc explanations of why your consciousness can't interact with the world, even though it's there.
That's
so
not ad hoc. That's a
it is.
natural phenomena.
No, that's
Haven't
ad
you ever-
hoc. So if
haven't
you're
you ever
saying the
heard-
world is mental and you're saying we can't mentally access it, even though we are also mental, you have to come up with this ad hoc explanation of
That's
why
not
we're
ad hoc, though.
dissociated. It is.
I have
you
a
don't get to refute that. That just is ad hoc.
No,
But
it's not.
yes, it is.
Why?
Because you're adding in an explanation to explain data that doesn't fit your theory. That's what ad hoc means. If the world is mental and we are mental, we should be able to interact with the world in a mental way to cause it to change. We can't. So you have to add in this ad hoc explanation to say, well, why can't we interact with the world if we're mental and it's mental? So it's like the interaction problem in reverse, essentially. Physicalism explains this perfectly. Brains are physical processes. Consciousness is a physical process, and we can only interact with things physically.
Okay, didn't you just say that the brain produces consciousness, right? But you don't have an explanation, so isn't that itself ad hoc?
No.
Why?
Because I haven't tried to explain anything away that's inconsistent with data. Like, it's all consistent.
Well, I can bring up a lot of studies that are inconsistent.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, that doesn't help you at all. Like, did I write the studies? No.
Okay. Well, okay. Let's start off with the most basic ones, because I feel like, we won't really get anywhere unless we start talking about what the actual data says. So let's start off. I'm not going to start with near-death experiences, because I know you've kind of went over that a lot. Let's start with I have a question to ask you. So would you agree that an increase in brain activity must correspond to an increase in experience?
So yes, probably.
Okay. So under physicalism, under the physicalist model, an increase in brain activity, regardless of what it is, must correspond to an increase in mental functions, right?
No, because there could be subconscious and unconscious functions. So there can be an increase in brain activity that has no effect on consciousness. Okay,
but again, you're kind of... So are you saying... Because I'm going to bring up a few studies which show that psychedelic drugs can... they can basically They can
we know psychedelic drugs can mess with the brain. That doesn't help your case at all. Like, all of the studies in neurology support physicalism. Every single one of them.
How?
Because that's what they do. They're just saying physical stuff in the brain causes changes. Yes. There's nothing in neurology that doesn't support physicalism. Like, everyone in neurology, everyone in cognitive sciences, all of them are physicalists because all of the evidence supports physicalism.
Okay, where's the evidence?
All of it, just every single paper is all evidence.
Give me one example of one paper that supports physicalism.
Google it. I'm not even going to waste my time on that. Google any paper you get it. That's evidence of physicalism. Physical tests, physical predictions. That's what evidence is. Evidence is, can we use a hypothesis to make testable predictions, and those testable predictions are confirmed by data, and it's confirmed that's evidence. So yes, every single one of them is evidence.
Okay, how? What's the argument? What's the inference?
If we start with the hypothesis, we make testable predictions. If those predictions are confirmed, that's evidence of the hypothesis.
Right. Okay, so great. Donald Hoffman has a hypothesis that all of reality is constituted by conscious agents. His model is strictly not physicalism.
Great. Then you can start making testable predictions with that and show that it works, and he hasn't. Because ours, we can. He can't. We win.
Okay, you're just making a bunch of claims without actually...
There's a reason that like 99% of neurologists and cognitive scientists are physicalists, because they use the model to make predictions and it works. That's how science works. Like, just Google it. Like, I can give you quotes from many cognitive scientists. I have them saved, who actually just specifically say this. Most cognitive scientists in the field are physicalists because this is how it works. Like,
you've never actually...
And Julian...
But yeah, you can't come up with a single paper that
I don't need to. I don't need to. I can just Google it. There's no reason for me to actually try and look for a paper that just says...
So you don't need explanation? You don't need to tell me?
No, I don't. You can just Google it. They all do that. There's no reason I would need to provide a paper for you. This is so basic. It's like, well, Google what the definition of a word is. Like, no, do it yourself. Like, every single one of them works for this.
Okay, so what's your explanation of how the brain produces consciousness? So if you're gonna make the claim that...
I don't have one. I don't need one. It's just physical interactions in the brain.
Okay, so I don't need an explanation. Okay, by that logic, then I don't need an explanation.
No. So again, you weren't listening. You weren't listening. So our model is a hypothesis. We use the hypothesis to make predictions, and those predictions are confirmed. That's evidence of the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is that the brain is produced by biological or chemical interactions. If it's produced by biological and chemical interactions, we can then do science. all of the neurology ever done about neurons and consciousness and predictions about what we're going to experience and what happens when you sit to take an electrode in our brain, all of those things. And those predictions are confirmed. That's the evidence. We don't actually need to know what consciousness is. We don't need to solve everything. That's not that's not how evidence works. We only need one thing. If we can make one testable prediction, that's evidence, and we can do that.
So
we don't need to solve the whole thing.
Let's go back to my example. Okay. So under the physicalist model, it would predict that an increase in brain activity would correspond to an increase in experiences.
Okay. No, again, there's parts of the brain that aren't conscious. So
okay,
be an increase
in that case, then you must believe that somehow underneath our awareness, there's constant psychedelic tricks going on all the time. I
have no idea what you're talking about. There's processes in the brain going on all the time that are not consciousness. There's lots of things that happen in the brain other than consciousness.
Well, I wouldn't say it's not conscious. I would say it's outside the
I don't care what you would say. I care what the science says. The science says it's not conscious. It's just interactive.
The science does not say that it's unconsciousness. What the science says is that there's a distinction between what's called self-reflexive consciousness, which is our awareness of our experiences, and then there's these unconscious or these what's called
unconscious processes. No, subconscious and unconscious are two different things. Subconscious is certain processes that do affect consciousness. Unconscious is things that do nothing for consciousness, like our heartbeat. Our heartbeat is unconscious. There's no conscious interaction with our heartbeat or our lungs or our blood flow or neurological signals. Those are all in the brain.
Dreams that you can't remember are not experiences?
What? No. Remembering is irrelevant. I never said anything about remembering. So heartbeat is no way connected to consciousness. Consciousness does not affect the heartbeat. The heartbeat does not affect the consciousness. There's no connection.
We don't have introspective access to the heartbeat, right? You would agree with that? Like
there's no relation to consciousness. It has no conscious interaction at all.
No, what I'm saying is we have no introspective access.
Right, and what I'm saying is there is no conscious relation at all to the heartbeat. It's completely unconscious. If we can shut down the brain and conscious completely, the heart works fine. It's not a conscious interaction. It is controlled by the brain.
Okay, I don't know. Okay, again, can we go back to my original study, which was under your model? Okay, without having ad hoc assumptions, because if you're going to say that
you kept saying that increase in brain access or brain activity would change some level of consciousness. That's false. There are parts of the brain that do not have anything to do with consciousness.
Okay, but then you would have to say that there's constant psychedelic trips going on all the time because this is what the
study
showed.
I have no idea what you're talking about here. I don't have to say anything like that. I know there are parts of the brain that do not affect consciousness. Like that is a fact. We know this is a fact.
Yeah, I know the brain produces conscious, or not produces it, but like affects it, right? Because under my model, everything's mental, right?
No, there are parts of the brain that have no effect.
So if you're going to say, okay, first of all, if you're going to say that all the studies prove that physicalism is true, that works just as fine under my model. So I can
yours doesn't make any predictions.
Prove idealism is true because all our consciousness can interact with are other conscious things or other mental properties.
No. You have to make predictions for it to be evidence. So physicalism, we say if the brain is physical, we can make predictions and those predictions are confirmed.
So
we make predictions. You don't. So ours work, yours don't.
Okay, what sort of predictions would my model make?
That's for you to decide. You have to make the predictions and then do the study and then see that they're confirmed.
I can predict what my model would say.
Then go write a paper and do it.
Well, I don't have to. I already.
That's what evidence is. You have to make a prediction and publish a paper showing it works. That's what evidence is. You have to make the predictions. You have to do the work. You have to publish a paper in an academic journal and showing they work. That's what evidence is. Physicalists do this every day. You don't. That's the difference.
What do you think those that publish in Philosophy of Mind have done? Because I think you're confusing.
Philosophy of mind. I'm not talking about philosophy of mind here. I'm talking about neuroscience.
Okay, neuroscience is not philosophy of mind.
I know it's not. That's the point. That's evidence isn't philosophy of mind. Philosophy of mind is a bunch of just I'm going to sit around and think about stuff. Evidence is neuroscience.
No, I don't know. Again, I have emailed many philosophers of mind. None of them dispute the claims in neuroscience. What they dispute is what is the exact.
I never said they dispute it. That's again. So evidence is testable predictions. You have to make testable predictions to be evidence.
Anything in neuroscience. No, there's no one.
I'm not saying dispute. I'm saying do something new. You have to add to neuroscience. You have to say, if idealism is true, here's a testable prediction that we can do in a lab that will be confirmed to verify idealism or an idealist hypothesis.
Right, exactly. So
you don't do that. We do. That's the difference. Physicalists do this every day in every single published paper everywhere around the world.
I know. And dualists and idealists do the same exact thing. Again, no one.
That's why it doesn't occur.
What do you mean?
They don't do that. That's why there's no evidence of it.
There's a lot of papers in philosophy of
Feel
mind.
free to publish them in academic
Just
journals.
as there's a lot of
philosophy of mind
papers.
is irrelevant. Philosophy of mind is irrelevant. I want neuroscience. Publish it in an actual scientific journal, not a philosophy journal. I
That's
want
a
testable
category error.
predictions.
You can't do that. That's like
Yes, you
saying
can.
I'm going to publish a physics paper and a biology paper. You can't just you can't do that. You can't
What
just
are you
publish.
talking about? So again, testable predictions. You need to make a prediction about something that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Like
So
with
if
the
I
brain,
have
usually,
if I have a
world.
physics model, okay, if I have a physical explanation, or like, you know, if there's some phenomena in nature, and if I write a paper on it, I'm not going to go publish it in a philosophy journal or a biology journal or a math journal. When I'm going to publish it in the physics journal.
Testable predictions. To make testable predictions, it has to have some interaction with the world. Maybe you don't want to make neurological predictions. Maybe you want to make physics predictions. I don't care. Publish it in a physics paper. But there has to be some physical change to the world that we can observe and test for it to count as evidence. Just explaining stuff that we've already seen isn't evidence. So
Okay,
the philosophy of mind stuff isn't evidence.
Okay, all right, let's talk about the nature of evidence then, because I feel like we could maybe have some progress. So you claim that all the evidence supports physicalism, right? So there's no evidence for idealism. So like literally all the evidence supports physicalism.
Yeah, as far as I know, the vast majority. I wouldn't say all of it necessarily.
Okay, so would you agree that in order to actually know evidence, and in order to actually like have awareness of evidence, you have to have this sort of consciousness?
Yes.
Okay, then. So let's talk about that. Okay, so in order for your mind, in order for your consciousness to have the knowledge of its own experiences, or the knowledge of, you know, the evidence itself, or how we actually build knowledge in the first place, like the nature, that's pretty much the nature of epistemology. We basically have to start with consciousness and then somehow know from there what the evidence actually says, right? You would agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, so how
None
do
of this supports your claim.
So my question is, how do you get from there's consciousness, which is mental states, to something that's non-mental? So how do you know that there's something non-mental in nature?
Testable predictions. We say if these things are physical and non-mental, and we make predictions and they work, then that's evidence that they're non-mental.
Okay, what predictions would you make?
If I drop a cup, it'll fall and make a noise. Done.
Okay, great. That's an experience. Again, noise. That's all experiential.
That doesn't matter. It doesn't help your case. So again, testable predictions are confirmed. It doesn't matter if we experience it through experience. That doesn't mean it ontologically is experience.
Right. So again, it doesn't mean it's ontologically experience. Right? You would agree with that?
Yes.
So you would. Okay. So let's talk about what is the okay, what is the nature of what things are, right? Okay. So what is that?
I mean, you're just going on those philosophical roots that just are irrelevant. Just if you think it's idealism, make a testable prediction. Go. That's all you need.
That's why I wanted to talk to you about those studies, because under those studies they found that there was no correspondence between an increase in brain activity.
I didn't even need to look at the studies to tell you why that would be wrong. Like, we know there are parts of the brain that can have increased activity and have no effect on consciousness. So we know that isn't
ad hoc, because you would have to say that there's
nothing ad hoc
going on in the unconscious.
No,
mind.
I don't have to say that at all. I know there are parts of the brain.
If you don't even understand the studies I'm talking about,
you're right. I don't need to, because you just said there's increased brain activity which causes effect on consciousness. I can say, no, that isn't true. I don't need to read anything about the study. Your first statement is false. I don't need to say anything about psychedelic anything, because there are parts of the brain that can have increased activity that have nothing to do with consciousness.
Okay, so I feel like I need to hold on. Let me see if I can consciousness without.
Also, that wouldn't even count as a testable prediction, because it's a counter prediction. It's saying something, here's something that physicalism wouldn't predict, but it's not a prediction idealism actually makes.
Right. So let's talk about what the predictions would actually say. If you're just gonna make the ad hoc assumption,
we don't need to talk about anything. You can just make the prediction. Say, here is the predictions we're going to make. That's all you need to do. Say, we're going to make this prediction, and then we're going to do a study to verify it. Go. You can make any predictions you want. You can predict there's going to a star that's going to pop into existence 30 seconds. So go for it.
Prediction. You build a model. Okay, what would this model say? What would this model say? And then you test it, right?
No. You just say, here's my model. Here are my predictions. I don't care what any other model says. Just here's
you don't care about the model, so you don't care if physicalism can explain it or not.
No, it doesn't matter at all. Again, that's not how testable predictions work. Testable predictions are, I have a model. I'm going to make predictions, and we're going to test to see if those predictions happen. If other models predicted or not makes no difference at all.
No, because what I'm saying is there has to be different models, right? So if you have
No,
two different models, they have to
no,
make different
no,
predictions.
no, that's not at all how it works. So again, you
In
just
certain
have to
phenomena,
say
they would, yes. Like if
no.
we're talking about idealism and
No,
ideal,
again, no. That's not how science works. Science is you make a model, you make a prediction that's something we don't know yet. It's novel. It doesn't matter if others would predict it later or not. It makes no difference at all. You're the first one to predict this new thing. You win. It doesn't matter if others would predict it. It's irrelevant.
right? But I'm basing it off the model. Okay.
So again, physicalism is irrelevant here. You need to say, here's my idealistic model. Here are the predictions I make. Let's confirm them. Just
Yeah, that's what
physicalism is irrelevant.
that's what Donald Hoffman does. That's what Bernardo Kastrup does.
Okay, then they can feel free to try and change the minds of every physicalist who does it better.
Are you saying that you have to change the minds of every scientist in order to claim that? So in order for science to progress, you have to change the minds of people?
Yes, that's literally what science does.
In that case, then the Big Bang before the 1950s wasn't a justifiable claim, even though we have very strong evidence for it, but yet 2/3 of the scientific community rejected it.
No,
So-
that's why they did accept it very quickly, because they were presented with
No,
the
they didn't.
evidence.
It was
Yes,
very
they did.
no, they didn't.
Yes,
It
they
was a
did.
very long process. At first, some people accepted it when the evidence came out, but most of them didn't accept the evidence when it came out. Okay.
Yeah, it took them
This
a few
whole
weeks to
idea
actually research it. It's no
that-
problem.
This
But
whole idea that scientists have to accept the evidence before it actually becomes a scientific fact is wrong. Again,
no, the evidence has to
something
actually be
being-
able to compel them, which it does. Like the
Something
Big Bang
being
did
proven-
compel them.
something being proven via scientific proof is different than it being proven or accepted by members of the scientific community. So just because
Yes,
something
obviously, but
is not
again, if
accepted by
it
the
works, it's going to be accepted by the scientific community over time. It's going to take some time, but it does. That's how it works.
Yeah, but not all the time. That doesn't always happen.
Yes, it does. It's literally,
No, it
there's
doesn't.
evidence it literally always happens. That's how it works.
I can give you a pretty good example of a case where even today, most scientists do not accept a phenomena, even though it's been scientifically proven.
Okay, what is that?
It's PSI phenomena. Again, probably not the best example, but it's, there are examples of phenomena where that have been scientifically proven, but yet scientists generally don't accept it. So
I know of no cases of that ever happening. They're all just not supported by evidence.
no, they're supported by evidence. Trust me.
Yeah, I don't have to trust you. I know I've researched them. They're not. That's kind of the problem. Like there are some really weird things that happen, like entanglement and particles existing and not existing at the same time, and those are accepted, even though they're completely ridiculous and they make no sense philosophically. We still accept them because we can demonstrate them in a lab. Space-time bending, exactly. Everyone hated that theory when Einstein presented it. They rejected it fervently because philosophically time can't bend. It's not a physical thing, but the evidence just won. Everyone had to accept it because the labs just showed it happened to be the case. So it is the case that if you can demonstrate in a lab, you win. No one else gets an opinion. And they're going to accept it. The whole field is going to accept it. The fact that they don't means it just hasn't been demonstrated.
So what you're saying is that a scientist has to accept it before scientific community has to accept it, even if the evidence supports
the scientific community has to look at the evidence you're presenting and see that it is actually evidence. Have to be like, this makes testable predictions and can be shown in a lab. Yes, we verify this is actually evidence. Yes, they have to do that. The experts have to look at it and say, yes, this is evidence, not just something some guy in his garage is making up. Yes. There has to be a set of people who are qualified in the field, who know the evidence, who can look at whatever you're presenting and validate that it is actually evidence and not just something you've made up. Yes, you have to convince the experts. The highest authority in science is the consensus.
Okay, so have you ever heard of the asterisk effect?
The what? You cut out.
Hold on, let me see if I can share screen real quick.
The SJ effect?
Yeah, it's not letting me share screen. I don't know why. Oh wait, hold on. There we go.
What was it called? I couldn't hear you.
Okay, so let's see here. So basically, it's where subjects will, like, even if the evidence is very clear on one side, if the rest of the group says that it's so, for example, like here, you'll see that this line corresponds to this line. But if you have the whole group saying that it actually corresponds to this line, then the group will generally, agree that it corresponds to this line, even though the evidence indicates that it corresponds to this line. So this whole idea that members of the scientific community have to accept the evidence before it actually becomes true is just ridiculous. Again,
that has nothing to do with the scientific community. That's how peer pressure works in a room.
The scientific, again,
That's how peer pressure works in a room. It's irrelevant to the scientific community. The scientific community works on testable
predictions. The scientific community has peer pressure?
No.
Do you really think that the scientific community has no peer pressure?
Of course they have peer pressure, but they do research to prove each other wrong. That's how you get famous. You want to prove each other wrong. That's what science is. It's not conformity to the peer pressure. I'm going to prove you wrong. I get famous.
I'm just trying to make my point clear to you. I mean, you don't have to accept, but just to
audience, what you're saying is objectively false. Like in the scientific community, our job is to say, whoever said that line is B is wrong, and if I can be right and they can be wrong, I get lots of money. So there's an incentive for scientific community to say, no, you're wrong. And they do that every minute of every day. That's the whole point of science. They're all saying, no, you're wrong, I'm right. That is their goal. So the Ashe effect doesn't really apply to science because they're all saying you're wrong. That's their goal. They're not just there to be conformists to be able to fit in society.
If the scientific community were given evidence for something and they all said, oh, you're wrong, without actually presenting a good argument against that view, under your logic, we should just accept the evidence.
No, they always give good arguments.
Accept the opinion of the scientists, even if the evidence indicates otherwise.
No, they don't ever just say you're wrong. They say you're wrong and then give evidence. So it's always with the evidence. Just saying you're wrong does nothing. No one cares about that in the scientific community. You need the evidence.
No, right. You need an argument for why.
Evidence. No one cares about arguments.
If person A has evidence for something, and a person B says, "Oh, you're just wrong," without actually providing an argument for why they're wrong.
Yeah, no one does that. So you're right. That's not an argument. That's not good.
They have done that.
No, that's not compelling in science. No one cares about that. They want evidence. That's the compelling thing. Is the evidence is the compelling thing. You don't get famous by saying no, you're wrong. No one cares about that. What you get famous for in science is saying you're wrong. Here's the evidence. That's what you get famous for. No one cares about people who just say you're wrong. It's irrelevant to science.
Right, but what I'm saying is, even if, like, again, let's go back to the Ashe effect. Okay, so evidence says this, it corresponds to this model, but if the rest of the scientific community thinks it's actually model B.
No, again, so it's not the rest of the scientific community thinks, it's the rest of the scientific community thinks and provides evidence that's wrong. So it's not just what they think, it's what they think plus the evidence. So the evidence is what's important.
Right, the evidence, exactly. Okay, so
yes, and the evidence points to physicalism.
So if the evidence is what is ultimately important, then it seems like you would agree with me that scientific conclusions are not based on scientific opinions, they're based on the actual evidence itself.
Yes, and the people who actually understand the evidence, which is the experts. So the experts get to have the evidence. You don't get an opinion outside of the experts. They get to say this works or this doesn't work because they actually understand it.
Explain why it supports one hypothesis over another. Right.
Yes, I've said that like 6 times in the past minute. They don't just say you're wrong. They say you're wrong and provide the evidence.
And provide the evidence and then explain why you're wrong. Yeah, so again, I want to see. So if it's so obvious that physicalism is true based on the scientific evidence, I would like to see again a paper that shows.
I don't think you're understanding what evidence is. Evidence is testable prediction. So every single paper that makes a testable prediction in neurology is evidence for physicalism because it said if physical processes are true, here's a prediction, here's a result.
Original studies. Okay, if you go back to the original studies that I cited earlier about psychedelic experiences, what they predicted, again, this is their prediction, that an increase in brain activity would correspond to an increase in experiences. That's what they predicted under their physicalist model. And what
so that doesn't help you.
It actually disproved that prediction. It actually showed the opposite, that an increase in experiences.
So again, that proves that their model was wrong. That doesn't prove physicalism wrong. It proves their model was wrong.
It proves it, but again, their model was a physicalist model. I'm not saying that this
doesn't help your case. That's not evidence for idealism. That means their model was wrong. Okay.
Right.
I don't support their model. Next.
Okay. Fair enough.
I mean,
but would you agree?
I said that in the first statement where you said that will brain activity increase consciousness? I said no, that does not work because here's the thing. So I obviously reject their model and gave an example of why I can reject their model and why physicalists mostly probably reject that model. So that model being wrong isn't evidence for anything.
Most physicalists didn't reject the model when it first came out. They only rejected when the evidence came out against their model.
That's just hearsay. I don't believe that at all because I got it right in the first 5 seconds. So if most neurologists were so stupid that I can get it right and they can't, then there's a problem. So I'm guessing that's wrong.
I'm sorry, can you...
So you're saying most physicalists thought this experiment was right? I got it right. As soon as you...
most physicalists thought that the model was right
So
originally.
then they all have to be idiots because I got it right. I said this is wrong in the first 5
No,
seconds
you
after
did
you
it.
said
No,
it.
you didn't.
Yes, I did. I said
You
you asked me, will increased brain activity have an effect on consciousness? I said no.
know,
There are
never
parts of the
said
brain that don't do that.
No,
So I
but
got
I
it right
never.
in the first 5 seconds. I already knew this was going to be false in the first 5 seconds. If most physicalists were so stupid that they couldn't do that, then there's a problem. So obviously that's wrong.
Okay, well, I don't. Okay, so what so if there's an increase in brain activity that doesn't correspond to an increase in experiences, then what is your alternative physicalist model?
There are other parts of the brain where there are
Right.
brain activity
So
that
are you
isn't
implying
consciousness.
again? Are you implying that there are psychedelic experiences?
No, I would not need that. Again, that's irrelevant. You've made no connection to that.
Yes, I have.
No, you
Because
haven't. You've made no connection.
If you're going to claim that there's unconscious processes that are really causing our experiences, like you've made multiple times,
Yes,
then you literally have to say that there are psychedelic trips underneath our awareness. Yes, you do. Because
no, I don't. There's no connection there at all in anywhere I'm arguing.
I did. Oh my god. Okay.
You've said nothing that requires that at all. There are parts of the brain that do not affect consciousness. You can have stimulus to that effect that has no effect on consciousness.
Okay, here's the problem. This is the problem I see. Okay, so the moment that you claim that there are unconscious processes going on in our brain that are causing experiences, then that means that the psychedelic drugs that cause a decrease in brain activity must really be caused by these unconscious processes that have no corresponding brain activity. Okay, because that's what the experiment showed. That's what the experiment showed. So you're making this ad hoc assumption that there are somehow psychedelic trips going on all the time.
Stop using psychedelic trips. Don't help you at all in this case.
Yes,
they do. Psychedelic trip is just a chemical reaction outside of the brain, something you ingest or something that interacts with your brain. But yes, so we know that happens. We know the brain, there are chemical reactions in the brain that don't affect consciousness, that produce consciousness.
Sure, but what I'm saying is psychedelic drugs really do have like a sense in which there's an increase in awareness, or there's like it feels more real.
Yes,
in
it
that
does
experience.
stuff to your brain. Obviously, who would reject that? But that doesn't mean anything. So again,
well, it does. If you
parts
are
of the brain
if you're going to say that consciousness or experience is produced by the brain, then the best model for that would be to say that an increase in consciousness would also increase brain activity. You don't agree with that model, so you have to what you have to do is you have to say that there are literally psychedelic trips going on.
Again, so that's obviously false. So a consciousness is a specific process that's in the brain. No, that's obviously false. Obviously false.
What's your
because
reasoning?
We know consciousness is a specific process in the brain. If you just
where?
flood the brain with activity, it's not going to increase consciousness. It's going to shut down consciousness. Consciousness is a specific function of the brain that has to be operated in a specific way. Yes, it is. That is exactly what it is. We've known that forever because that's epilepsy. Epilepsy, you have lots of shocks in the brain.
No, I'm not
it shuts down consciousness.
I'm not talking about epilepsy.
I never said you were. You're talking about activity in the brain. Epilepsy is a kind of activity in the brain. So more activity in the brain does not necessarily equal more consciousness or awareness. Consciousness is a specific function in the brain, which means it has to be operating correctly for it to produce consciousness effectively. If you just do a bunch of shocking things to do the brain, it's not going to make better consciousness. It's going to mess up your consciousness.
Right, I would agree with that. Okay.
And so in every physical,
if you look at psychedelic drugs and what they do to experiences, they actually increase experiences despite the fact that they decrease brain activity. Again, that is not that.
Were you not listening to what I just said? So if you have a specific kind of function in the brain and lots of things are going on and you shut down all of the other stuff so that thing can work better, that can definitely happen. There's no problem with that. Again, there's lots of parts of the brain that are not conscious. So if you shut those down and the brain can work more effectively for the conscious parts, that would make perfect sense. There's no problem with that at all.
Well, I wouldn't agree that it's unconscious. I mean, there's a paper by Bernardo Kastrup. It's called "The Unconscious May Very Well Be Conscious," and he goes into how
no one cares what he thinks. He's not a scientist.
Well, he's a philosopher of mind. He talks about this a lot, and
no one cares what philosophers think in science. Science is
what are you talking about?
No one cares what philosophers think. People care what scientific results you get. Philosophers don't get any scientific results. So, but here's the problem: is that again, that's all perfectly consistent with physicalism. Like no one discounts that at all. So yes, if you shut down a lot of the brain function, and then it can focus more on consciousness to make consciousness clear. Not a problem. That wouldn't in any way be inconsistent with physicalism. It's not that the amount of brain activity equates to consciousness. That's not how it works.
It wouldn't. What did you just say? Sorry.
The amount of brain activity does not equate to consciousness. So more brain activity does not equal more consciousness, or less brain activity does not equal less
It
consciousness.
would if you're having psychedelic experiences.
No, that's not
yes,
how it
you
works.
would.
Again, so no one in physicalism accepts that. That's your own straw man of physicalism.
That's not a straw man,
No one
dude.
cares. So again, in
This is what the
physicalism,
model predicted, and it was proven false.
No one cares about their model. Their model isn't physicalism. Their model is their model. So their model is wrong, okay? That has nothing to do with physicalism. So again, in physicalism, it makes perfect sense that if you decrease brain activity and shut down all of the extra stuff, then consciousness could definitely function more effectively. So you don't shut it down too much.
Where? How? That would seem to contradict physicalism.
No, not at all. Again, so if you have lots of things going on, like imagine if you're trying to juggle 4 cups and you then put down 3 cups, it's much easier to juggle 1 cup. Pretty simple. In physicalism, if consciousness has lots of stuff going on in your brain and you shut it down, remove it, get rid of the extra stuff, it can be easier to focus on specific things, making consciousness more clear. So there's no problem with that at all.
I don't think you understand like what physicalism actually shows. Physicalism would predict that an increase in brain.
No one accepts that.
Yes, that's what the models
say. I'm a physicalist. I'm saying you're wrong. Next. So no, physicalists do not accept that.
So what do physicalists accept then if it's wrong? If tell me, what do physicalists accept?
So again, your brain consciousness is a function of the brain. The brain has to operate in a specific kind of a way to do consciousness. Which means
what is that specific way? Okay, let's get more specific. What is that?
We don't know yet. We haven't solved it. We will. We haven't solved it yet. It's a specific function of the brain. Not a problem.
Like what?
Like what? What do you mean?
Can you explain to me how can a fundamentally unconscious brain, okay, produce consciousness, produce the awareness or the qualities of experience?
Same way a brick can produce a wall. Bricks don't have the property of wall, but if you add them together, you get walls.
Okay, that's actually a really good analogy because I like that because I feel like this pretty much shows the problem with the physicalist idea of the brain producing consciousness. If you add in a bunch of unconscious things and you put them all together, what are you going to get? More unconscious things. Just as if you
that's a composition division fallacy. So that's false.
I'm sorry, what?
It's a composition division fallacy. Like if I can say every brick, no brick has the property of walls, but if I add a bunch of bricks together, well, then I can't obviously get a wall. I just get more bricks. But wait a minute. If you add enough together, you do get a wall because there's emergent properties. Those are a thing, which idealists just don't understand. Emergent properties are things.
Emergent properties.
Yes. You understand if you add bricks, you get walls?
Strongly or weakly emergent?
I don't add any. I don't adopt that epistemology. So.
You have to, because if you're going to say that it's weakly emergent, then that's just a different form of reductionism.
I don't adopt that epistemology. Mine's just emergent or non-emergent. That's so. I don't have a strong or a weak version here. It's just emergent. So if you add a bunch of bricks together, you get a wall. It's saying that, well, no brick has a wall. So if you add a bunch of bricks together, you obviously won't get a wall.
So I feel like
it makes no sense.
I feel like we're not making our definitions clear. So if I take a brick and I put a bunch of, I build a wall out of that, the wall itself, are you saying that consciousness emerges from the brain as a whole? Like when we add in all the neurons and we, do all the weird stuff, that eventually you'll get consciousness out of that whole product. Is that what you're saying? Because that would seem to imply what, at least what your analogy kind of goes into. I don't even think it's good analogy.
There's a minimum requirement for consciousness, and it is a specific function of the brain. So the whole brain isn't required for consciousness. You can remove parts of the brain and still have consciousness, but the brain produces the function of consciousness, just like bricks produce a wall. You can have lots of bricks produce a wall, and then a whole bunch of other bricks do other things. So I don't know exactly what you're saying.
How do you get from building from unconscious things and then somehow getting consciousness or somehow getting this new awareness of experiences?
That's how emergent properties work. You start with things that are not of a certain kind, you add them together, and then you get the kind. Like no hydrogen atom is a sun, but if you add enough together, you get a sun, a star. No water molecule is an ocean, you add it together, you get an ocean.
That doesn't explain anything. Because you can, here's the problem, you can reduce water, for example, to, water molecules. You can reduce a wall of bricks to bricks.
Yes,
you can't do that.
Yes, you can. That's the point.
No,
yes, you can. That's the whole point. Can't do it yet. We don't have the solutions to it yet, but that's just an argument from ignorance. We will be able to because that's where all the evidence points.
It's not an argument from ignorance. It's a contradiction in terms.
No, that's literally what an argument from ignorance is. Arguments
No,
from
it's
ignorance don't. You can
Because
phrase
here's
any
the
argument from
problem.
ignorance in
Here's
that
the problem
form.
I see. Here's the problem I see, Tom. If you're going to say that consciousness is not fundamental to the brain, but rather the brain produces consciousness, then what that would essentially mean, or in other words, what that would essentially mean is that the experience in and of itself reduces to something that's not experience in and of itself. Or in other words, if the brain, if experiences and consciousness are not fundamental to the brain, but rather the brain produces experience, then it necessarily leads to our experiences being themselves non-experiential. And thus,
Yeah, there are composite of physical things, not a problem.
that means you have a contradiction.
No, because in physicalism there is no contradiction. You've just assumed
you
that
do,
consciousness
because
is its own thing.
Tom, we don't have the experience of what it's like to be bouncing atoms
Right.
bouncing
So again,
around in our head.
Right. Again, I understand what you're saying, but again, that's your presupposition. You presuppose consciousness is its own kind of thing. We don't. So it's not. There's no contradiction there in physicalism. There isn't this thing of non-physicalism that we're trying to explain in
Yeah, but you
physicalism
have to
terms.
accept
It's all
existence.
physical.
Even a physicalist would have to accept that consciousness exists, regardless of. Okay, then so it would be its own thing in that regard.
No,
If
that's again wrong. So like walls exist. A wall is not a thing into of itself. It's reducible. So I can accept that walls exist without saying that walls can't be reduced to bricks. Like it's the same thing. Like I can accept consciousness exists as a composite of physical things. There's no contradiction there.
yes, there is, because that would mean that our experiences in and of itself reduces that's not an experience in and of itself.
Yes, there's no contradiction there.
Yes, there is, because if our that means that our
That's
experience
literally
right now,
a verbatim
that means-
composition division
that means
fallacy.
you would have to believe again. You would have to literally believe that our experience is non-experiences, like literally.
Our experience is a result of non-experiences. Yes.
No. That's a contradiction, because again, you would have to literally say that our experience of our awareness of the world is itself not experience at all.
It's a composition of things that are not experienced. So again, this is literally a composition division fallacy.
You're not going to get experience. You're going to get more non-experiences.
You keep repeating the dictionary definition of a composition division fallacy and just keep calling it not a composition division fallacy. Like you can just remove consciousness, replace it with the term wall and bricks, and just verbatim repeat everything you just said. That is literally a composition division fallacy. There is nothing in there that supports your argument. Saying, well, you can't get walls from non-walls, it makes no sense. Like, yes, we can. That's how emergent properties work. We know emergent properties are things.
Yeah, but I think you're confused, because again, walls. If we're talking about the qualities of walls, if we're talking about how walls work, you can't reduce it because there's nothing that would fundamentally distinguish between a wall and a brick, at least in that sense. Okay, again, it's probably not the best analogy.
No, that's fine. I understand what you're saying. I can do the same thing with a star. A star and a hydrogen atom have fundamentally different properties. One emits heat and one emits electrons. One affects gravity in a specific way. Hydrogen atoms don't do that. Suns have these new unique properties that have nothing to do with hydrogen atoms that no hydrogen atom has, because they're emergent properties. But just saying that they're their own thing because they have new properties is irrelevant. No, it does not make them their own ontology. They can still just be a composition of smaller things that don't have that property.
Okay, so again, how would you say how is adding in a bunch of it's like you're saying that we can take nails.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. So like think about it like in the term of stars. Hydrogen atoms do not emit light. They don't create oxygen molecules. They don't create heavy elements. But if you add enough of them together, because of how gravity works on these things, they create this new property called stars. And these stars do extra things.
Right.
So if you have this one collection of things that is just matter, it does nothing on its own. If you add them together and they are affected by this new property, this new law or nature or whatever, then they can do new things that they weren't able to do before.
Right. So if you were to for example, this is kind of like where my problem with physicalism comes in and trying to explain consciousness. So if you were to take, let's say, water and try to build a star from that, you can't, right? Because then what you would basically be making is you're not making a star per se. You're making something more like Pluto or a planet that has ice, right? So it's not a star. In the same way, you can't take
I'm not sure I'm following your argument, because if you put enough water together, it would create a star.
right, but it wouldn't be a star emitting light. It wouldn't be a star emitting, like
no, it would be like literally the exact same, because all a star is just a big
no, but it wouldn't be
conflagration of
giving out
mass.
heat, essentially. So
Yes,
it wouldn't be giving out heat, right?
Yeah, it would. So again, because like a neutron star is just a star where all of the particles, the protons and neutrons, have just collapsed together, and there's no electrons anymore because of the mass of the star. So if you just take any combination of matter and you just put it together, enough of it to cause a gravitational pull great enough to cause it to compress, you will create a star. Doesn't matter if it's water or hydrogen or helium or anything.
Yeah, but
So-
you wouldn't create a star that gives out heat from that if you were only to take water.
Neutron stars give out heat.
Yeah, but neutron stars are not made of water. They're made of different particles.
They're made of neutrons and protons. So every particle is made of neutrons and protons. Damn it. So if you add any particle, a lot of them together, and they have a gravitational pull to collapse, they will create a neutron star. Any combination of matter, water, crystals, sand, air, anything. They will all create a star if you add them together and create enough gravitational force to cause them to collapse. So I'm not sure what you're getting at there.
The problem is this is the issue I see. It's like if you were to take a bunch of nails, put them together, and then get cake out of those nails. You can't do it, right? It's the same sort of thing with if you're going to say that consciousness is reducible to matter. If you're just going to take a bunch of unconscious things and put them all together, you're not going to get consciousness in the same way that if you take a bunch of nails, you put them together, you're not going to get cake, right? Because it requires something different. It requires fundamentally a different substance, so to speak.
Right. So you've presupposed that. So you have a presupposition. Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but that's a presupposition on your part that no one really shares. So we can just say
people that share it.
I mean,
there may not be
majority
that share it.
That's not part of the argument. You're right. That's not part of the argument.
This is the problem of consciousness, where you can't.
No, that's your presupposition. That's your problem. You have presupposed this to be the case, and we can just say we don't agree with that, and it's perfectly consistent. So this isn't actually a problem in physicalism. This is a problem with your presupposition. You have a presupposition that consciousness is somehow fundamentally different than matter. We don't. That's like you. It's like from our perspective, you have a presupposition that walls are fundamentally different than bricks. Like there is no evidence one way or the other. It doesn't say that we can't prove one way or the other that it is or is not fundamentally reducible. But the evidence, all of the evidence and testable predictions shows that it is. So our evidence, or our side, the physicalist side, makes testable predictions based off of this assumption, which work consistently. Your assumption that they are fundamentally different, if you wanted to support that, you would have to make new testable predictions, demonstrate them in a paper, and then publish that paper.
Yeah, and that's what people do in philosophy of mind. There's a lot of arguments in philosophy of mind.
Arguments aren't evidence.
That argue for dualism.
You need evidence. Arguments don't work. You need evidence.
That is evidence. Arguments are evidence.
Arguments are not evidence. You need testable, verifiable, scientific evidence.
You can use testable scientific evidence in arguments, okay, but arguments are in some weird way. It is evidence.
No. You need to make new predictions we don't know yet. Like you can obviously take any known evidence and explain it in an argument. That's not evidence. That's post hoc rationalization. What you need is to take your worldview, then make new predictions that no one has predicted yet, things we don't know yet, do an experiment in a lab like neuroscience. That doesn't need to be neuroscience, but it can be, and then publish that in paper. You need a new, novel, testable prediction that you can demonstrate that supports your conclusion, not just post hoc arguments. Like everybody can make those. Young Earth creationists make those. Flat Earthers make those. We don't need the arguments. We need the evidence.
Right. So, but would you agree that arguments can lead to evidence? Like they help you to like come up with a.
Well, they help you come up with a model, but then you need to demonstrate that model.
Right. But again, it still helps, right?
It helps you come up with a model, but again, flat earthers come up with a model, young earth creationists come up with a model. Those aren't evidence, those are just models. So you need to demonstrate that the model is true with the testable predictions.
Right. So that's kind of what I'm doing with, my stuff. My model is that, all of reality, again, you may not agree with it, but
well, I'm fine with your model. I don't see a problem with your model. The problem is it doesn't make any testable predictions. So yeah, you're totally fine with using the evidence to create a model, and then that model to be verified to make it reasonable to believe, you would need to be able to make testable predictions about things we don't know yet, demonstrate stuff we don't know yet. in a paper and publish that paper in like a scientific neurology journal, something that's demonstrable, not just a philosophy journal.
Okay, I don't think you understand how academia works with regards to
Pretty
different
sure I do.
publications. No, you don't, because you keep making this. You keep making like this claim that, oh, well, in order for something to be true, it has to be published in a scientific journal, which is ridiculous, because nearly like all the best arguments for physicalism are actually not in scientific journals.
Again, arguments. No one cares about arguments. No one cares about the philosophy journals. There's no Nobel Prize for philosophy. No one cares about philosophy. There's Nobel Prizes for neurology and science because those make demonstrable, testable predictions. Science doesn't care about the arguments.
If you go to the philosophical fields, there's literally nobody in those fields that are disputing what the science says. The only disputes have to do with how you interpret the evidence.
And that's the problem. The interpretations aren't evidence. No one cares about the interpretations. They want new data. Use your interpretation to make new scientific data, or it's just a useless post hoc interpretation. No one cares about the interpretations. They want the evidence.
Okay, but I think, again, you can interpret, like, every piece of evidence that we have in science is interpreted in a certain way. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, then. So this whole idea that you can separate evidence from interpretation, I think, is ridiculous, because there's different models of how evolution works.
I'm not sure what you're saying here. So
there's different interpretations of quantum mechanics. So this whole idea that you can somehow divorce interpretation from evidence is just plainly false. I
never said you did. That wasn't my argument. So again, the problem of underdetermination states there are infinitely many ways to explain anything. Any collection of data, there are infinitely many ways to explain it. There's always going to be infinitely many interpretations. The way you say one is right is you take that interpretation, you use it to make new predictions that no one else has made yet. And if you can confirm those, your model is right, or is better, has more support than the other one. It doesn't matter if the other ones can also predict that. There's going to be infinitely many that can always predict that, whatever your prediction is. But if you can do it first, you have evidence. Physicalism does that consistently. We make predictions that no one else has predicted yet. We get them right. We have evidence. But
like what
doesn't. About how neurons work, about how synapses work, about how interactions with electrodes in the brain, all of that stuff.
Idealism does the same exact thing.
No, so I don't the fact that you can post hoc explain it, anyone can do that.
Post hoc explain it. Then I could just say, oh, well, then physicalism post hoc explains it, because I'm going to presuppose that idealism, if I'm going to presuppose that all of reality is mental and that I can only interact with mental things, right, then physicalism is just post hocly explaining neuroscience.
I'm not sure you're understanding here. So if we have two scientists, one is an idealist, one is a physicalist. The physicalist makes a prediction about a scientific experiment he does the experiment and gets it right. He has evidence. He wins. And the idealist can say, well, I can explain that too on my model. Well, that's just post hoc.
That's not post hoc. What if the idealist predicts it first and then the physicalist post hoc explains it?
Yes, that would be good. That would be idealism. That would be evidence for idealism. Yes. So again, it's whoever makes the predictions and does the experiment and gets it right first has the evidence. The fact that you can explain it after, like, it's literally what post hoc means, after the fact. If you explain it after the fact, that isn't evidence.
I gave an example of where a physicalist, as you claim, post hoc explains it, which is, again, the physicalist predicted that an increase in mental activity would correspond, at least in principle, to an increase in experiences. And what they found was the exact opposite. Again, I'm just going off of the evidence.
So a physicalist got something wrong is not evidence of idealism.
I'm not saying it's evidence for idealism. What I'm saying is that they have to like you said, post hoc explain it, because then you have to make the claim that, oh, well, there's these unconscious processes that are going on we're having constant psychedelic trips all the time that we have.
So this was not a representation of physicalism. This was a guy who got something wrong. Physicalists did not all agree with this. I mean, we can know that for certain because I didn't agree with it in the first 5 seconds you stated it. So we know most people are not I'm not smarter than everyone else in the world. So it's probably the case that most people knew that wasn't going to happen. So your one example of here is a physicalist who got something wrong isn't evidence of anything. Is that physicalist got the model wrong. I agree with you. Everyone agrees with you. That's not post hoc. We literally never agreed with that guy. So that doesn't help your case. So again, but that still isn't evidence of idealism. What you need is an idealist prediction that gets it right in a lab. You need an idealist who makes a prediction about something new that we don't know yet, saying using idealism, here's something we can do to verify this prediction and get it right, which hasn't happened.
Okay. All right. I feel like we're talking past each other, but
yeah, I was going to say it's gone a little bit past an hour, and usually that's the time we do for an episode. So I was gonna. I didn't want to interrupt you guys in the middle of the conversation, but I was starting to think, okay, but if it's kind of naturally gotten to a place where we feel like I don't know, I've enjoyed listening to it. Obviously, it's gotten a little, I wouldn't call this bad combativeness though. Like there's a difference between what happened last night with Skylar and Eric, and I think what's happening here. It's kind of
That was glorious. I love that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think in general this was a good discussion. It can get frustrating sometimes when we have fundamental disagreements or even different epistemologies, and we feel like we're talking past one another. But overall, I enjoyed listening to it. I hope you guys thought it was fun. I enjoy having both of you guys on the show. I hope both of you would be happy to come back in the future. I guess real quick. Again, I put both the YouTube channels in the description. People go there, subscribe. I know, Tom, there's patreon.com/TJump, paypal.me/TJump. Let me think. Yeah. Twitch.tv/TJump. And Kyle, obviously your YouTube channel's in the description. Is there any other places people can go for you?
Well, actually, something I wanted TJump. We never discussed it because we were talking about like the hard problem, but I'll share screen my thing real quick so I can have. You can check out my YouTube channel. It's Christian Idealism, and then there's also there's a blog I wrote. It's called A Defense of Libertarian Free Will, and we never got to discuss free will, but like when it comes to philosophy of mind, I think free will is probably one of the big areas that I research, and so it's really long. But TJump, I would recommend that you read that article. It's in Inspiring Philosophy's blog, and you can tell me what you think about it at a later time. But like I use a lot of the arguments that you kind of use against free will, and I kind of rebut them in that blog. So you can read it at your own time. But yeah, I have a lot of citations, a lot of different studies that kind of pretty much I think show that at least the way that most neuroscientists have been interpreting it has been wrong for the past 50 years or so. But yeah.
Do you want to tell me your response to the fact that it's logically impossible because it's either determined or random?
Well, actually, I do get into that later in the blog. I talk about how basically the objection that you seem to bring has to do with it's called a Strawson type argument. So premise one, nothing can be acasual, nothing can cause of itself. And so that's a pretty popular argument against free will in the literature. Hold on, let me so I can share screen it again. But so this is the argument that he uses. And my response is basically Peter Tysey's model, which is based on criteria causation. And so basically the criteria or reasoning is the weighting values, goals, and past outcomes that the brain uses in order to choose future outcomes. So during deliberation, the brain will cause the various options, producing a pathway of events along that choice, much like an imaginary world line. So new criteria will be built from this world line. And there's a lot, it's very complicated, but basically I get into like how there are models that get around this argument right here. That seems a very, probably, in my opinion, I think it's like the best argument against free will in the literature. But obviously there's a problem with it if you have models that kind of contradict it. So
not really. Again, you can make up anything you want. You can make up all kinds of gibberish to get around any logical problem. But again, if you can't demonstrate it, it's just a made up hypothesis. So none of those work.
You can read what I get into.
I'm not really interested because I've gone through this so many times. Like if you want to convince somebody, convince the academic literature. And you're not going to. I mean, they already know that's been shown wrong so many times. It's just you're not going to be able to do it. But if you can, congratulations, all accepted.
Okay.
Well, I guess I don't want to keep anybody past the time they've agreed to. So I do appreciate both you guys being there. The places I mentioned, again, the YouTube channels are in the description. Everybody go subscribe. And until next time, Tom, Kyle, I really appreciate both you guys taking the time out today. And hopefully we'll get you guys back on soon.
Thanks.
All right.